Welcome to week 11. We're going to be talking about personality and stress in just a minute, but you'll notice I'm in a little bit different background than I have been. Maybe you don't notice, I don't know. But I just wanted to, it's a little cold outside, so I'm inside, and this is my kind of stress managing space. And I think it's a really nice thing. I'm very fortunate. I have a room, an office in my home, but for many years I've had just a corner of a room. I think it's really nice just to have a space somewhere in your larger space that is dedicated to things that are special to you, that make you feel good, that nurture you. So you can see a little bit of mine. I will share. I don't really know how to do this, so it's working well. Um, I have lots and lots of books. I have all kinds of stuff that's meaningful to me. I'm just giving you kind of it's not perfect what it's doing, but it works for me, and I enjoy it. It has a very good vibe, and that's what's most important. My son comes in here sometimes just because it feels good. Has a good energy. I'm gonna put myself down here. All right, so let's get started. So anyway, that's something to think about. Do you have a space in your own place? Even if it's just a corner, it works. So anyway, let's talk about personality and stress and how certain personality traits can be helpful to us when dealing with stress, and maybe some others don't behoove us or benefit us. Behoove means benefit us as much. And so let's see what we got. And I'm having some issues with this thing today, trying to get it to do what I want it to do. So I apologize. All right. So let's first look at models of personality, stress, and health. Um, there's what's called a predisposition model. It's very genetic in nature. And it basically says that we are genetically predisposed to we might be genetically predisposed to be a little bit hyperreactive to the stress response. So maybe we have a limbic system with a larger amygdala that gets like a loud car alarm that gets set off really quickly. So our fight or flight is more easily activated. And that predisposition then makes us more sensitive and vulnerable to stress. And so it doesn't think that personality is causal in any way, meaning that it doesn't cause issues with stress or health or anything, but that it could work backwards. So an example would be like I have here, a biologically based predisposition to an elevated stress response. So if you are just predisposed to that louder car alarm, an easily activated stress response system, that might play a role in developing a neurotic personality. Now, that's something we'll talk more about later as part of the Big Five personality model. Neuroticism is prone to is anxious, worrisome. It's kind of that form of personality. But a neurotic personality, that says that the predisposition might help in developing a neurotic personality, but it doesn't work the other way. That it's not a neurotic personality that can cause an exaggerated stress response. That the predisposition, the biological basis, the constitution comes first, and then the personality. Okay, so that's the predisposition model. Health-related behavior models will simply look at and say, okay, there are certain personality qualities, traits, characteristics that seem to drive health-related behavior, which then influences our well-being. So certain personality constellations are more apt to take part in healthy behaviors like exercise, nutrition, healthy coping mechanisms, where some other personality constellations might be more prone to negative or unhealthy coping mechanisms. So from the Big Five, high scores in extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and low scores in neuroticism are more prone to health-related behaviors. So we'll talk more about what those are, but it just says that there are certain personality traits and qualities that will, by nature, seek out healthier behaviors. And then that influences how you manage health, stress, and what your health is like. One of the Big Five is called openness to experience, and it does show, or there's some things that say that it will have maybe greater substance abuse because they're open to trying new things. Okay, so there's a moderation model, which basically just says that our personality can either buffer or intensify our response to stress. So it can influence. Remember, appraise comes from Lazarus, and it's how we look at a situation and define it and explain it to ourselves in terms of how we understand what's happening. And so certain personalities will look at a situation and appraise it maybe more negatively or with greater anxiety, like neuroticism might look at it in a more worrisome state. And then that's going to impact a vulnerability to stress and then illness. Whereas optimism might look at it in a different way and then be more prone to choose healthier responses to it. So personality can have an influence on moderating our behavior, um, and how we cope with stress. And that can impact our physiological, cognitive, emotional, behavioral responses. It doesn't define those, but it can certainly be an influence on them. And then also, one point would be interpersonal stressors. So, stressors between people, conflict can be exaggerated by certain personality traits. So, someone who's low in agreeableness or the kind of the ability to adapt and get along, and high in that neuroticism, like anxiety and worry and so forth, might in in relationship with others relate in ways that cause more conflict, and then that adds to personal stress. So those are just some things to think about. So those are three sort of broader models for personality. But then we need to look at what is personality. I like this slide. I think it's pretty. So what exactly, think about it. How do you define personality? What is someone's personality? Are we born with a personality? Or is a personality made or born? And so let's talk about how psychology sees that. One thing I will say is I get students who ask me this in my development class, and my answer is oftentimes, well, according to which theory? Because Freud, Erikson, there's lots of different theorists, and we talked about some of those with psychology, and they are going to define personality in very different. They may define personality in very different ways, or at least how it develops in very different ways. But let's look at a few things. All right, I keep having to move myself. So personality comes from the word persona, which means mask. So it's kind of what we show the world. I can think of it as characteristics of someone, their behaviors, their moods, emotions, systems of thoughts and belief that we express to others and that are used to define and identify us. So if somebody said, hey, tell me about Tracy, then some of those identifiers might have to do with how I behave, kind of what my behavior's like, what my mood tends to be like, how I emote, like how I regulate my emotions. We often define people through that. Are they high strung? Are they often nervous? Are they loud? Are they aggressive? Are they calm? Are they, how do they express their emotions? So it's things that are both used, that we use to express who we are to others, and then how we are identified as an individual. Some believe patterns of personality are enduring, and others that personality can be changed. Now, this is actually really big because it was long believed that personality was enduring. And there are some models still, the big five being one, that say that there are some things that last, that it's an essence of who we are, and that we express those essences in different ways. And some of those ways can be shifted and changed. There's an article, hopefully still live, online, that says it is a little bit of both. And then have been studies. Davidson out of Wisconsin did some studies that showed that people could shift, children could shift their personalities, or maybe their temperaments based on learning that they did. So kind of, that's still debated. Not much in psychology is an absolute, just because we're constantly learning how people grow and change. So just a difference between what a trait is and what a state is. So traits are dispositions, not necessarily predispositions, but dispositions. The way we seem to trend or tend to behave in certain ways can be our disposition. Do I tend to be optimistic or engaging or lively, or do I tend to be somber or quiet or none of these good or bad, but just what is my disposition? So traits are considered more enduring and part of the self that predispose us, though, to particular responses. So if I tend to be outgoing or sociable, then it's going to predispose me to particular responses in social situations or with people, whereas the opposite will do opposite. States are more temporary. It's my state of mind at the time, right? A person can experience a state of anger. I might be angry in this moment because of something that happens and it's a little more situational. Or I could have kind of an angry trait. Like I might trend angry if you think about it. Like just someone, if you or there are people that you would identify, they're just angry people. That would be more trait oriented, where a state, all of us can feel angry at different times. Okay, okay, yep, go up here now. So what's temperament as different from personality? The biologically based foundations of personality is what people usually say. Temperament is something that we're more inborn, like we're born with. It's innate to who we are. It's original wiring of the individual. So we all come out in different ways, and babies have different temperaments. We're genetically coded towards particular traits. Some babies are more optimistic. Now, that might be that they are more cheerful. They just seem happy, like, just even infants that are just happier all the time. And those that cry more and seem to be harder to soothe. Those are temperaments. Includes general emotionality, levels of activity, and sociability. Like you might have the baby who's always kind of active, and you might have those that just kind of like to gaze around and are a little quieter. So temperament can be seen in babies. So temperament types: easy, difficult, or slow to warm up. Those are some things that are used in the literature. The baby that's kind of easy going, seems to handle sensation, very stimulation, very kind of off their back. The difficult one might cry a lot more, be a lot more easily activated. Slow to warm up, they just take a little bit of time. Mine was definitely slow to warm up and venturing into difficult occasionally. Um, and we don't know what we're going to get when they come out, right? So there's 9 Thomas and Chess temperament traits. We have these 3 types, and then there's these traits. So I did put this on here. I don't know that you can see them all. Activity level, distractibility, focused feeder or easily distracted. Do they look around? Are they eating and then they're looking around, or are they just really focused on that? Intensity, strong, loud reactions or quiet, mild ones. Regularity, do they like routine or just not bothered by changes? Sensory threshold, easily startled. Approach withdrawal, eager or hesitant with new places, activities, people. Adaptability, quick or slow to adapt to change and new things. And I think this one is resistance, stubborn or give up easily. So you can see maybe some of those traits in adults, right? Even so, does that maintain over time from being babies? But babies have these different traits as well. So big ones that are looked at are levels of sensitivity to outside stimuli and their ability to self-soothe, to think about temperament. So temperament is inborn. And then the question becomes, can temperament change? Um, and those are some studies that have shown changes in brain wiring, kind of brain activation based on learning that children can do, especially around the approach withdrawal. Like that can be shy or bold. And are they like run up to people, or are they more hold back? And they have seen that in time, children can change some of their ways of being and actually see changes in the brain around it. Anyway, that's a whole other class talks about that. So I'm going to give some more specific models here. I don't know where I just went. I don't know if I'm still on there for you. Oops, sorry. I'm going to pause for a second and fix this. I didn't even notice that. So anyway, Cattell and Eisenach's model. These are trait theories. So these are like the idea that there are inborn traits. So Raymond Cattell, this is back in the 60s, proposed that there are 16 source traits that make up a personality. I do have like a little inventory online of Cattell's traits that you can look up. He developed the 16 personality factor questionnaire to measure those. I have some additional information on him and on his traits, and we'll look at those in a second. Hans Jürgen Eysenck, I'm not actually positive how you pronounce his name. His was the Penn model, psychoticism, extroversion, introversion, and neuroticism. So he named three big. Instead of 16, he said that there are some things we can bring this down to looking at three super traits or personality types. And these are more qualities on a spectrum, like that we all might have a little bit of some of them, but where do we end up on the spectrum? Some people will say like the Myers-Briggs is like a strict trait one that you either this or that, like it's a category. I actually do see it as a spectrum. But anyway, won't get into that big time. So the qualities on a spectrum that you might like, where do you fall in line with these? I believe super traits were outward expressions of temperament and genetic differences. So very much about genetics sort of being the origin of traits, and then the super traits are expressions of those. Believed arousal in the environment arouses the nervous system, and some people need or desire more stimulation than others for optimal functioning. Now, this is interesting because it really goes to the introversion extroversion piece. In the Myers-Briggs, I don't know how many of you have heard of that one, but we talk about introversion, extroversion being where you get your energy from. Do you get energy more when around a lot of people, or do you need time alone to recharge? That's the difference in the Myers-Briggs between introvert and extrovert. When in kind of in the culture, it's more like people that are loud or people that are quiet. And it really is more than that. For him, introversion, extroversion was the belief that, and I actually think I have this more as we go, but that introverts actually are wired with a higher kind of their nervous systems are more charged to begin with, so they need less stimulation from the outside in order for optimal functioning. They really can't handle more stimulation, where extroverts have a lower threshold sort of naturally, so they seek out more stimulation on the outside. So again, I'm having trouble with moving this, so let's hope it works. There we go. So here are Cattell's 16 personalities, and warmth, reasoning, emotional stability, dominance, liveliness, rule consciousness, social boldness, sensitivity, vigilance, abstractness, privateness, apprehension, openness to change, self-reliance, perfectionism. You can't see tension. It's too low, I'm sorry, but it's on there. You will, you have the PowerPoint. You can go back and look at this. I'm not going to go through all of this. These are just his. It's also set up a bit as a spectrum between low score and high score. So where do you fall in that range between, say, warmth, reserved and detached, or warm and outgoing? You're going to have these two spectrums. You're going to have these two extremes and then a spectrum between. So those are Cattell's. And then Eysenck's big three, psychoticism. So this isn't used much in the literature anymore because I think the name in general just made anybody who scored anywhere in there, it's like, oh, I'm so, thinking that they're psychotic when it's not necessarily that. Now, people with psychosis tended to score higher in this one, though. Some reflects traits associated with creativity, nonconformity, and social deviance. Like I don't go with the social norm. I go outside the social norm. I'm creative. I'm nonconforming. So people, even with those, what could be positive traits, would show up with higher levels of this. But characteristics do include aggressive, cold, egocentric, impersonal, impulsive, antisocial, unempathetic, and then creative, tough-minded, non-conforming, and so forth. They do overlap with traits of those who are psychotic or antisocial, but not all who score high have a clinical psychosis. So this one was a little bit tricky, and so therefore taken out of the literature quite a bit. We do see a lot of extroversion, introversion in the literature. Extrovert, sociable, lively, active, assertive, sensation-seeking, carefree, dominant, require and desire more stimulation because they have a higher threshold for it. Their nervous systems, lower states of arousal. I already said that. So introverts are the opposite of that. And they already have high states of arousal in their nervous system, so seek lower states from the environment. So the lemon drop test in the pupil dilation, it's kind of research that's looked at some of this. And what they did find in some studies is that you put a lemon drop on the tongue of an introvert, they will actually have greater um, saliva production than an extrovert. It's like they just have a greater activation towards these things than extroverts do. So extroverts need more in order to activate. So introverts' pupils were shown in one study to dilate quicker. Everything just happens at a higher, they're like ramped up already, showing. So just some things about that. Neuroticism is also quite a bit in the literature too, around personality. Includes characteristics such as anxious, depressed, guilty feelings, low self-esteem, tense, irrational, moody, and emotional. Isaac believed that those high in N have neuroticism, have overactive limbic systems, so in their amygdalae, that they would be overactive, more prone to fast and rapid stress response systems. So unfortunately, it also looks like it would probably correlate neuroticism with introverts, which this part of the literature is hard for me because I am, believe it or not, an introvert. I think that introverts have a lot of power, and I think that this is where some of the ideas about kind of difference equals deficit kind of thing, we just have to be careful with. So introverts have some great things about them, and then there are things that each have that are challenging. I had a friend once who was a big extrovert say extroverts need reflection, introverts need kind of action. So there's kind of this opposite thing happening. So neuroticism, low tolerance for stress, because they're more likely to perceive more things as threats, and they have a low tolerance for it, so it does activate stress a lot. Respond with negative emotions more frequently and intensely when they experience stressful life events. That was a quote by Leahy in 2009 in some literature looking at all of this kinds of information. So this was just sample questions that assess neuroticism. Do you sometimes feel happy, sometimes depressed without any apparent reason? Does your mind often wander? Are you inclined to be moody, frequently lost in thought, sometimes bubbling, sometimes sluggish? Um, so kind of at what rate? So these are just some of his. I also have one of his inventories online that you can look at and does all of those. So I'm going to stop right now. I think that's it for, yeah, I'm going to stop right now and take up in another thread.